A splash of ice-cold San Pellegrino hit her face, dripping down the faded collar of her thrifted trench coat. Gasps echoed off the marble walls of the Pierre Hotel's grand ballroom. Camilla Rostova, the heiress to the Éclat luxury empire, stood sneering, the empty crystal glass still poised in her manicured hand. "Trash," Camilla hissed loud enough for the entire New York elite to hear. "Security, remove this stray before she infects the atmosphere." The room fell into a suffocating silence. No one moved. No one breathed. Until the heavy oak doors blasted open and the man who owns half of Manhattan walked in his eyes, burning with a rage that could level cities. The invitation had arrived in a matte black envelope embossed with gold leaf that felt heavy under the fingertips. It was the kind of stationery that whispered money, old money, the kind that didn't need to shout to be heard. But for Genevieve Laurent standing on the corner of 5th Avenue and 61st Street, the envelope felt less like a ticket to paradise and more like a summons to a trial. The wind in New York that evening was biting a prelude to a harsh November. Genevieve pulled her coat tighter. It was a beige trench vintage Burberry, but worn at the elbows and lacking the crisp, stiff structure of the new season's line. She had bought it 3 years ago at a consignment shop in the East Village for $80. Tonight, amidst the sea of custom Versace and archive Chanel, stepping out of blacked-out Escalades and Rolls-Royce Phantoms, $80 looked like an insult. This was the Gilded Night Gala, an annual charity event hosted by Éclat, the luxury lifestyle brand that had taken the world by storm. It was the brainchild of Camilla Rostova, a woman whose face graced the covers of Vogue and Harper's Bazaar more often than actual models. Camilla wasn't just a brand owner. She was a deity in the religion of materialism. Genevieve took a breath, the cold air stinging her lungs. She checked her phone. No messages. Nathaniel was supposed to meet her inside. "Go ahead, Jen," he had texted an hour ago. "Board meeting is running over. I'll slip in the back. Don't worry about the dress code. You look beautiful in anything." She smiled faintly. Nathaniel. He was the only reason she was here. He was a consultant, or at least that's what he told everyone. He worked long hours, wore unassuming grey suits, and drove a Volvo that had seen better days. When they married 6 months ago at a quiet courthouse ceremony, Genevieve knew she was marrying a man of kindness, not means. They lived in a modest walk-up in Brooklyn Heights. They budgeted for groceries. They were happy. But Nathaniel had insisted on this night. "It's important for my networking," he had said, eyes pleading behind his wire-rimmed glasses. "Just make an appearance, General. For me." So here she was, the invisible guest. Genevieve approached the red velvet ropes. The paparazzi were a blinding wall of flashbulbs, screaming names. "Zendaya, over here. Gigi to the left." When Genevieve stepped onto the carpet, the shouting stopped. The silence was jarring. Cameras lowered. A few photographers chattered amongst themselves, likely asking who the woman in the tired beige coat was, and why she was cluttering their frame. She kept her head down, clutching her small, unbranded leather clutch like a shield, and hurried toward the entrance. Name. The bouncer was a monolith of a man holding a clipboard that looked tiny in his hands. He didn't look at her face. He looked at her shoes. Scuffed flats. Comfortable, practical, and utterly forbidden in this zip code. Genevieve. Harrington. She said, using her married name. It still felt new on her tongue. The bouncer ran a finger down the list. He frowned. He flipped the page. He flipped back. The line behind her was growing impatient. She could feel the heat radiating from the woman behind her, a socialite dripping in diamonds who tapped her foot with a rhythmic, impatient clack, clack, clack. "I don't see a Harrington." The bouncer grunted. "Are you sure you're at the right venue? The staff entrance is around the back on 60. Genevieve felt the blood rush to her cheeks. No, I'm a guest. My husband, Nathaniel Harrington, should be on the list. Or perhaps under his company. Omnicorp, she guessed. She didn't actually know the name of the consulting firm he contracted for. The bouncer scoffed. Lady, this is the Gilded Knight. We don't have consultants on the primary list. Step aside. Please, Genevieve said, her voice trembling slightly. Check again. He said he RSVP'd. Is there a problem here? The voice was like silk wrapped around a dagger. Genevieve froze. She knew that voice. Everyone in New York knew that voice. She turned to see Camilla Rostova descending the grand staircase of the lobby to greet the VIPs. Camilla was a vision of terrifying perfection. She wore a custom crimson gown that looked like it had been poured over her body, structured with diamonds sewn into the bodice. Her hair was a platinum helmet of waves, and her eyes, ice blue, scanned Genevieve with the clinical detachment of a scientist examining a bug. This woman isn't on the list, Miss Rostova. The bouncer said, his tone instantly deferential. I was just directing her to the exit. Camilla stepped closer. The scent of tuberose and cold cash wafted off her. She looked at Genevieve's coat. She looked at the scuffed flats. A slow, cruel smile spread across her red lips. Wait, Camilla said, holding up a hand adorned with a canary diamond the size of a quail's egg. Let her in? The bouncer blinked. Ms. Rostova. I said let her in. Camilla repeated, her eyes gleaming with malicious amusement. It's a charity gala, isn't it? We need someone to remind us why we're donating to the poor. She adds, contrast. The socialites in line tittered. A few covered their mouths to hide their smirks. Genevieve felt a knot of nausea tighten in her stomach. She should leave. She should turn around, walk back to the subway, and go home to their cozy apartment. But she thought of Nathaniel. He needed this for his career. If she left, she might ruin his chance to network with these people. She had to be brave. Thank you, Genevieve whispered, her dignity hanging by a thread. Don't thank me, darling. Camilla purred, leaning in, close her voice a toxic whisper. Just try not to touch the drapes. Dry cleaning is so expensive these days. With a flick of her hair, Camilla turned and swept back into the ballroom. Genevieve took a deep breath, steeled her nerves, and walked into the lion's den. The grand ballroom of the Pierre was transformed into a surrealist garden. Massive sculptures of gold wire hung from the ceiling, dripping with real white orchids. A string quartet played a haunting, modern rendition of Vivaldi in the corner, but the music was barely audible over the roar of conversation. This was the inner sanctum of American wealth. To the left, Anderson Cooper was laughing with a tech CEO. To the right, a famous Hollywood director was arguing animatedly with a senator. Genevieve navigated the room like a ghost. She removed her trench coat, revealing a simple navy blue slip dress underneath. It was elegant, but plain, no sequins, no train, no designer logo. In a room of peacocks, she was a sparrow. She found a waiter passing with a tray of champagne and reached for a glass, needing something to steady her hands. Excuse me. A woman bumped into her hard. Champagne sloshed onto Genevieve's wrist. The woman didn't apologize. It was a minor influencer, a girl Genevieve recognized from Instagram, known for unboxing videos of handbags that cost more than Genevieve's college tuition. The girl looked at Genevieve, wrinkled her nose, and turned back to her phone, live streaming. Guys, you won't believe who they let in here. Literally, the aesthetic is ruined. Genevieve wiped her wrist with a cocktail napkin and retreated to the edge of the room near a display of Eclat's newest jewelry line. The display was magnificent. Under bulletproof glass sat the Coeur de Lion, a ruby necklace rumored to be worth $12 million. Genevieve, who had studied art history before dropping out to care for her sick mother, found herself captivated by the setting. The craftsmanship was exquisite. "Do you like it?" Genevieve jumped. A man was standing next to her. He was older, perhaps in his 60s, with silver hair and a tuxedo that fit him perfectly. He had a kind face, weathered by time, but brightened by intelligent eyes. "It's beautiful," Genevieve admitted. "The bezel setting on the ruby is unusual for this era. It reminds me of the Cartier pieces from the 1920s. The man's eyebrows shot up. "You have a keen eye. Most people just look at the size of the stone. You're looking at the architecture. The stone is just geology." Genevieve smiled, relaxing for the first time that night. "The setting is the art. That's the human element." The man smiled warmly. "I'm William. William. Just William." "Genevieve." She shook his hand. "Just Genevieve. And what brings just Genevieve to a shark tank like this?" William asked, gesturing to the room with his glass. "My husband," she said. "He's trying to build his business. I'm just holding the fort until he arrives." "He's a lucky man," William said. "Real appreciation for art is rare in this room. Most people here only appreciate the price tag." Before they could continue, a shadow fell over them. "William, darling." Camilla Rostova's voice cut through the air. She descended upon them, flanked by her entourage, two women who looked like clones of her, dressed in matching silver and gold. Camilla ignored Genevieve entirely and kissed William on both cheeks. "I didn't know you were coming. I would have sent a car." "I prefer to walk, Camilla. Keeps the heart pumping," William said, his tone polite but distant. Camilla finally turned her gaze to Genevieve. The smile dropped from her face instantly. "Oh, you're still here. I thought you would have found the buffet by now and stuffed your purse with shrimp." Her entourage giggled. Genevieve straightened her spine. "I'm actually admiring the collection, Ms. Rostova." "Admiring?" Camilla laughed, a harsh, brittle sound. "You mean coveting? Let's be honest, sweetie. You're looking at that necklace the way a dog looks at a steak through a butcher shop window." "Camilla," William warned, his voice low. "That's enough. Oh, lighten up, William." Camilla waved a dismissive hand. "I'm just protecting my brand. Eclat is about aspiration. It's about the elite. Having someone like her standing next to the Coeur de Lion devalues the piece. It's like putting a bumper sticker on a Ferrari." Genevieve felt the tears pricking her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "I think you're confusing net worth with self-worth, Ms. Rostova. One can be bought. The other cannot." The room went quiet. People nearby stopped talking. The influencer turned her phone camera toward the commotion. Camilla's eyes narrowed into slits. She took a step closer to Genevieve, invading her personal space. "Listen to me, you little mouse. You think you're clever? You think because you read a few books you can stand here and lecture me? I built this empire. I decide what is valuable and what is garbage. And you—" She looked Genevieve up and down with sneering disgust. "You are the definition of a knockoff. I think I'll wait for my husband outside," Genevieve said quietly, turning to leave. "No, you don't walk away from me when I'm speaking to you," Camilla snapped. In a fit of calculated rage, Camilla grabbed a glass of sparkling water from a passing tray. It wasn't impulsive, it was theatrical. She wanted a moment. She wanted a viral clip. "You need to cool off," Camilla said, and then she threw it. The sensation was instantaneous and shocking. The ice water hit Genevieve's face with the force of a slap, drenching her hair, her eyelashes, and the front of her modest navy slip dress. It dripped down her chin, soaking into the fabric of the vintage trench coat she still clutched in her hand. For 3 seconds there was no sound in the grand ballroom of the Pierre. The orchestra had stopped. The chatter had ceased. The only sound was the drip, drip, drip of water hitting the marble floor. Genevieve stood frozen. She didn't wipe her face. She couldn't move. The humiliation was a physical weight pressing down on her chest, making it impossible to inhale. She felt the eyes of 300 of New York's most elite citizens burning into her. They weren't looking at her with pity. They were looking at her with a mix of horror and morbid curiosity, like drivers slowing down to gawk at a car crash. Camilla Rostova stood her ground, the empty glass still in her hand. She didn't look remorseful. She looked triumphant. She tossed the glass onto a nearby tray with a clatter that rang out like a gunshot. "Oops," Camilla said, her voice dripping with faux innocence. "My hand slipped. Though honestly, you should thank me. You looked like you needed a shower." A ripple of nervous laughter moved through the crowd. The influencer with the phone moved closer, zooming in on Genevieve's wet hair, desperate to capture the humiliation in 4K resolution. "Security." Camilla snapped, her voice suddenly turning sharp and authoritative. "Get this wet dog out of my ballroom. She's dripping on the floor. It's a liability." 2 large security guards materialized from the shadows. They weren't the polite bouncers from the front door. These were the interior enforcers, men built like tanks with earpieces and stone faces. One of them, a man with a thick neck and a scar above his eyebrow, grabbed Genevieve by her upper arm. His grip was tight bruising. "Let's go, miss," he grunted, pulling her roughly. "Please." Genevieve gasped, finally finding her voice. It came out as a broken whisper. "I'm waiting for my husband. He's coming." "Oh, stop it!" Camilla rolled her eyes, addressing the crowd now as if she were performing a monologue. The imaginary husband, the consultant. Let me guess, is he parking the car? Is he invisible? Or did you just wander in off the street, hoping to steal a centerpiece? The crowd laughed louder this time. The herd mentality had taken over. Camilla was the queen, and the queen had decided that Genevieve was the jester. "Drag her out," Camilla commanded, turning her back on Genevieve to grab another glass of champagne. "And sanitize the area where she was standing." The guard yanked Genevieve. She stumbled, her wet shoes slipping on the polished floor. She nearly fell, catching herself just in time, her dignity shattering with every second. She looked toward the entrance, a silent prayer forming in her mind. "Nathaniel, where are you?" And then the atmosphere in the room shifted. It wasn't a sound. It was a change in air pressure. The heavy double oak doors at the main entrance, which had been closed to keep the paparazzi out, didn't just open. They were thrown open with such force that they slammed against the interior walls with a boom that shook the crystal chandeliers. Thum. Every head turned. The string quartet, who had just started to play tentatively again, stopped abruptly. Standing in the doorway was a man. He was silhouetted against the flashbulbs of the paparazzi, outside a dark figure cut from the night itself. As he stepped into the light of the ballroom, the air seemed to leave the room. It was Nathaniel. But it wasn't the Nathaniel Genevieve knew. This wasn't the gentleman who made her blueberry pancakes on Sunday mornings wearing mismatched socks. This wasn't the man who drove a beat-up Volvo and worried about the electric bill. This man was wearing a tuxedo that fit him with lethal precision, black velvet bespoke, cut to emphasize broad shoulders and a powerful stance. He didn't walk. He stalked. His stride was long and predatory. His face, usually open and kind, was a mask of cold, concentrated fury. His jaw was set so hard, a muscle twitched beneath the skin. Behind him trailed 3 men in grey suits, carrying briefcases, looking terrified, struggling to keep up with his pace. Nathaniel didn't look at the decor. He didn't look at the celebrities. He didn't look at the jewels. His eyes scanned the room with the precision of a predator seeking a target. He saw the crowd parted in the middle. He saw the puddle of water. And then he saw the security guard's hand gripping Genevieve's arm. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Nathaniel crossed the 50 feet of the ballroom floor in seconds, the crowd parting for him like the Red Sea. They didn't know who he was. Most of them didn't recognize him without his glasses, and he was rarely seen at these frivolous parties. But they recognized power. True power emits a frequency, and Nathaniel was broadcasting a signal that said danger. "Nathaniel," Genevieve whispered, her voice trembling. She was shivering now, the cold water seeping into her skin. Nathaniel stopped 3 feet away. He didn't look at her yet. He looked at the security guard's hand on her arm. His eyes were dark voids. "Remove your hand," Nathaniel said. His voice wasn't loud. He didn't shout. He spoke in a low baritone register that vibrated through the floorboards. It was a voice of absolute command. The security guard, a man who had bounced professional boxers from clubs, hesitated. He looked at Nathaniel, then looked at Camilla for instructions. "I said," Nathaniel stepped closer, his voice dropping an octave, "remove your hand from her, before you lose it." The guard released Genevieve, as if he had been burned. He took a step back, hands raised in a defensive posture. I was just following orders, sir," Ms. Rostova said. Nathaniel ignored him. He turned to Genevieve. The rage in his eyes instantly evaporated, replaced by a look of agonizing tenderness that made the women nearby hold their breath. "Jen!" he breathed. He reached out his fingers, trembling slightly as he touched her wet cheek. "Are you hurt?" "I'm okay," she stammered, trying to smile, but her lip quivered. "I'm just wet and embarrassed. Nathaniel, we should leave. Please, let's just go." Nathaniel took off his velvet tuxedo jacket. He wrapped it around her shoulders, engulfing her in his warmth and the scent of sandalwood and expensive scotch. He pulled the lapels tight, shielding her from the staring eyes. "We aren't going anywhere," Nathaniel said softly, brushing a wet strand of hair from her forehead. "Not yet." Well, well, well. The slow clap broke the moment. Camilla Rostova sashayed forward, her confidence shaken, but her ego still in the driver's seat. She looked Nathaniel up and down, licking her lips. She saw the expensive cut of his suit, the way he commanded the room. She was intrigued. "So the invisible husband appears," Camilla purred. She stepped into Nathaniel's line of sight, blocking his view of Genevieve. She tossed her hair. "You must be the consultant. You clean up nice. Better than your stray cat of a wife, anyway." She extended a manicured hand toward him. "I'm Camilla Rostova. You're standing in my ballroom, and you're making a scene. But I'm willing to overlook it if you buy me a drink and explain why you married a woman who wears last season's clearance rack." The room held its collective breath. Camilla was flirting with him. She was publicly hitting on the husband of the woman she had just humiliated. It was the ultimate power move. Nathaniel slowly turned his head to look at Camilla. He didn't take her hand. He looked at it as if it were covered in slime. "Camilla Rostova," Nathaniel said, testing the name on his tongue. "The owner of Ekla." "That's me," she beamed, preening. "And you are—" Nathaniel straightened up to his full height. He loomed over her. The air crackled with electricity. "I am the man whose name is on the deed of this building," Nathaniel said calmly. Camilla blinked. "Excuse me. I am the man whose private equity firm, Calum Capital, acquired the majority debt of your company, Ekla, 3 hours ago." He continued, his voice steady, relentless. Camilla's smile faltered. "What? No. That's impossible. My investors would never—" "Your investors were panicked," Nathaniel interrupted. They were looking for a buyout. I gave them one. I bought it all. The inventory, the trademark, the lease on your flagship store, and the debt. All of it. He took a step closer to her. Camilla took a step back, her heels clicking nervously. You, she stammered. You're lying. Who are you? I told you, Nathaniel said, his voice rising, resonating off the walls, silencing every whisper in the room. I am Nathaniel Calloway. Gasps erupted throughout the room. The name Calloway was royalty. It was American steel shipping and tech. It was old money and new money combined. He wasn't a billionaire, he was the billionaire. He was the man who moved markets with a tweet. Camilla's face went white. All the blood drained from her complexion, leaving her looking like a wax figure. Calloway. But she said you were a consultant. I consult, Nathaniel said coldly. I consult companies on how to survive when I decide to crush them. He reached out and took Genevieve's hand, lacing his fingers through hers. He held their joined hands up for the room to see. And this woman, Nathaniel's voice thundered, shaking with a righteous anger that made the glass windows rattle. This woman you just threw water on. This woman you mocked. This woman you treated like garbage because she doesn't wear a logo on her chest. He looked at the crowd, challenging every single person who had laughed. Then he looked back at Camilla, his eyes burning with blue fire. She is not a stray. She is not a guest. She is my wife. The words hung in the air like a guillotine blade. She is Mrs. Calloway, Nathaniel continued, his voice lethal. And as of this moment, she is the majority shareholder of Eclat. Camilla Rostova looked as though she might vomit. She swayed in her heels, her hand grasping for a nearby table to steady herself. The arrogant sneer was gone, replaced by the terrified realization of a person watching a tsunami approaching from the beach. Nathaniel! Camilla choked out her voice, high and pitchy. She tried to laugh, but it came out as a manic squeak. Mr. Calloway, please, it was a joke, just a bit of fun. You know how these parties are. We were just playing. Playing, Nathaniel repeated. He didn't shout. His calm was far more terrifying than any scream. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a plain white handkerchief. He turned to Genevieve and gently dabbed a drop of water from her chin. You humiliated her for sport, Camilla. You judged her worth based on her coat. He turned back to Camilla. Do you know why my wife wears that coat? Camilla shook her head mutely. Because she donates 90% of her allowance to the pediatric oncology wing at Mount Sinai, Nathaniel said. Because she doesn't care about your hollow status symbols. She cares about people, a concept you seem entirely unfamiliar with. The crowd murmured. People were already pulling out their phones, deleting their Instagram stories, mocking Genevieve. The tide had turned violently. Mr. Calloway, please. Camilla pleaded, tears of panic welling in her eyes. Let's discuss this in private. My brand, my reputation, your reputation. Nathaniel laughed, a dark, humorless sound. Your reputation is finished, Camilla. But let's make it official. He snapped his fingers. One of the men in grey suits who had trailed him in stepped forward, opening a briefcase. He handed Nathaniel a thin blue folder. This is the termination of your lease for the flagship store on Fifth Avenue, Nathaniel said, tossing the folder onto the table next to the champagne fountain. I'm invoking the moral turpitude clause. Publicly assaulting a guest at a charity gala, that's a breach. You can't do that, Camilla shrieked. That store is my life. And this, Nathaniel took another document, is the recall of the Coeur de Lion necklace. He gestured to the $12 million ruby in the display case, the one Genevieve had been admiring. That necklace belongs to the Calloway family trust, Nathaniel revealed. We loaned it to Eclat for the evening to help you raise money. But since you don't think my wife is worthy of looking at it—" He walked over to the glass case. He looked at the security guard, the same one who had grabbed Genevieve. "Open it," Nathaniel commanded. The guard scrambled, fumbling with his keys, shaking. He unlocked the case. Nathaniel reached in and lifted the heavy ruby necklace. The stones caught the light, blazing red. He walked back to Genevieve. "Turn around, my love," he whispered. Genevieve, still in shock, turned slowly. Nathaniel draped the $12 million necklace around her neck. The cold gems settled against her skin, a stark contrast to the damp cotton of her dress. He clasped it. "There," Nathaniel said, stepping back to admire her. "It looks much better on you. As you said, the setting is the art, and you are the masterpiece." Camilla let out a sob. "You're stealing my centerpiece. It was never yours." A new voice spoke up. William, the older man Genevieve had met earlier, stepped out of the crowd. He wasn't smiling anymore. He looked disappointed. "William!" Camilla gasped. "Help me tell him." "Hello, Camilla," William said gravely. He walked over and stood next to Nathaniel. He placed a hand on Nathaniel's shoulder. "Genevieve," William said, bowing his head slightly to her. "I apologize for not stepping in sooner. I wanted to see if Camilla had any redeeming qualities left. I see now that I was mistaken." "You know him?" Genevieve asked, confused. "This is William Calloway." Nathaniel introduced him. "My uncle and the chairman of the board for Apex Holdings." Camilla's knees gave out. She slumped into a chair, burying her face in her hands. She had insulted the chairman and assaulted the CEO's wife in the span of 20 minutes. "Camilla," Nathaniel said, his voice cutting through her sobbing. "You have until tomorrow morning to vacate your office. I'm installing a new CEO for Eclat. Someone who understands that true luxury is about grace, not arrogance." He looked at the crowd. "The gala is over," Nathaniel announced. "Everyone go home. The open bar is closed." He wrapped his arm around Genevieve's waist. She felt small against him, but stronger than she had ever felt in her life. "Ready to go, Mrs. Calloway?" he asked, pressing a kiss to her temple. "I think the pizza place on the corner is still open. I know you prefer that to the caviar." Genevieve looked at Camilla, who was now weeping into her hands, surrounded by fake friends who were already drifting away, distancing themselves from the sinking ship. She looked at the crowd, who were now looking at her with awe and envy. She touched the ruby around her neck. "Yes," Genevieve said, her voice clear and strong. "Let's go home, Nathaniel." As they walked toward the exit, the sea of people parted. But just as they reached the double doors, a voice called out. "Wait." It was Beatrice, a rival socialite who had always hated Camilla. She stepped forward, holding a glass of red wine. She looked at Camilla, then at Genevieve, and smiled, wicked smile. "Mrs. Calloway," Beatrice called out, "you forgot something." Beatrice turned to Camilla, who was looking up with mascara running down her cheeks. "A toast to the new management," Beatrice said, and with a flick of her wrist, Beatrice splashed her entire glass of red wine onto Camilla's pristine white tablecloth and the hem of her custom crimson dress. "Oops," Beatrice winked. "My hand slipped." The ballroom erupted in chaos, flashbulbs exploding, as the paparazzi rushed the doors to catch the aftermath. But Nathaniel and Genevieve didn't look back. They walked out into the cold New York night, leaving the sharks to eat each other. The silence inside the vintage Volvo was heavy, but it wasn't the suffocating silence of the ballroom. It was the silence of a world shifting on its axis. Nathaniel drove with one hand on the wheel, his other hand gripping Genevieve's tightly, as if he were afraid she might dissolve into mist. They weren't going to a penthouse overlooking Central Park. They were driving back to their walk-up in Brooklyn Heights. That was the first shock of the evening's aftermath. The billionaire still wanted to go home to the place where the radiator clanked and the floorboards creaked. "You're angry," Nathaniel said finally, his eyes fixed on the Brooklyn Bridge stretching out before them. Genevieve looked out the window at the East River, dark and churning. She touched the ruby necklace that was still around her neck, a $12 million weight resting against her skin. "I'm not angry, Nathaniel. I'm disoriented. I feel like I woke up in someone else's life." "I didn't lie to you about who I was," Nathaniel said softly. "I am Nathaniel. I'm the man who burns the toast. I'm the man who loves your sketches. That's the real me. The money, the Calloway legacy, that's just the noise. I wanted to know that someone could love the man without the noise." Genevieve turned to him. In the passing streetlights, he looked tired. "You bought a company tonight, Nathaniel. You destroyed a woman's life in 5 minutes. That's not noise. That's terrifying power. She hurt you," Nathaniel said, his voice hardening instantly. "I have the power to stop people from hurting you, and I will never apologize for using it." The next morning, the world had changed. Genevieve woke up to the sound of her phone buzzing incessantly. She had 400 missed calls. Instagram was crashing. The headline on the New York Post, which Nathaniel had left on the kitchen table with a cup of coffee, read, "Cinderella and the Wolf Calloway. Heir revealed in shocking gala takeover." There was a note from Nathaniel. "I have a meeting with the lawyers to finalize the acquisition. A car will pick you up at 10 a.m. You have a board meeting at 11. Dress comfortably. You're the boss now." At 10 o'clock, a.m. sharp, a black Maybach pulled up to their curb. Genevieve stepped out. She wasn't wearing the vintage trench coat today. She wore a tailored white suit she had bought for a job interview 3 years ago. It wasn't designer, but it was sharp. She kept her head high. The Eclat headquarters in Soho was a glass fortress of intimidation. When Genevieve walked into the lobby, the atmosphere was funereal. The receptionists, who usually sneered at delivery drivers, stood up so fast their chairs toppled over. "Good morning, Mrs. Calloway." The head receptionist stammered, pale as a sheet. Genevieve walked past the marble pillars and the oversized portraits of Camilla Rostova that still hung on the walls. "Please have maintenance remove those portraits," Genevieve said quietly. "Replace them with mirrors. I want the customers to see themselves, not the owner." She took the elevator to the top floor. The boardroom was filled with men in suits, the remaining board members of Eclat, the investors who hadn't sold out, and the executives who had enabled Camilla's reign of terror. When Genevieve entered, they didn't stand. They looked at her with skepticism. To them, she was just a wife, a figurehead. She sat at the head of the table. The chair was massive leather and still smelled like Camilla's tuberose perfume. "Gentlemen," Genevieve began, her voice shaking slightly before she steadied it. "I know what you're thinking. You're thinking I'm here because my husband wrote a check. With all due respect, Mrs. Calloway." A grey-haired man named Sterling spoke up, leaning back with arrogance. "That is exactly what this is. Eclat is a billion-dollar fashion empire. It requires a shark to run it, not an art student." The room murmured in agreement. Genevieve looked at Sterling. She remembered him. He was the CFO. He was the one who had approved the budget cuts for the factory workers while raising Camilla's travel allowance. "You're right, Mr. Sterling," Genevieve said. "I'm not a shark, but sharks are mindless eating machines. They devour everything until there is nothing left. That is why Eclat is in debt. That is why your public image is in the toilet. She opened a folder she had brought with her. Inside were sketches. Her sketches. Not of clothes, but of supply chains, of marketing narratives, of art history references. Camilla built a brand on exclusion, Genevieve said, standing up and pacing the room. She sold the idea that you are only special if you are better than everyone else. That is a dying model. The new generation doesn't want to be better than their neighbor. They want to be connected to them. She threw a packet of papers onto the table. This is the new strategy, she announced. We are pivoting. No more invite-only sales. No more sizing that stops at a size 8. We are going to collaborate with artists, not just celebrities. We are going to use the Coeur de Lion ruby, not as a prop for galas, but as the centerpiece of a traveling exhibition that funds art programs in public schools. Sterling scoffed. Charity. We are a luxury brand, not a non-profit. Luxury is influence, Genevieve countered sharply. And right now our influence is toxic. Nathaniel Calloway owns 51% of this company. I speak for him. But more importantly, I speak for the customer you threw water on last night. She leaned her hands on the table, looking Sterling in the eye. You have two choices. You can get on board with the rebranding, or you can join Camilla in the unemployment line. I believe my husband's lawyers are in the next room drafting severances. Who wants to be first? Silence descended on the room. Sterling looked at the door, then back at Genevieve. He swallowed hard. The exhibition idea, Sterling muttered, adjusting his tie. It has potential for tax write-offs. Genevieve smiled a small, dangerous smile that looked very much like Nathaniel's. Excellent. Let's get to work. 3 months had passed since the night the water hit the floor of the Pierre Hotel, yet the ripples were still reshaping the landscape of New York's high society. Spring had finally broken the city's grey winter chill. The magnolias in Central Park were exploding in pink and white, signaling a rebirth. High above the bustling streets of Soho, inside the headquarters of Eclat, a different kind of rebirth was taking place. Genevieve sat behind the desk that had once been a throne of intimidation. The room had changed. Gone were the stark, cold marble surfaces, and the intimidating oversized portraits of Camilla Rostova that used to stare down at visitors like judgmental deities. In their place, Genevieve had installed warm walnut shelving, overflowing with fabric swatches, art history books and sketches. The floor-to-ceiling windows were thrown open, letting in the sounds of the city, the honking taxis, the chatter of tourists, the rhythm of life. It was no longer a fortress. It was a workshop. She adjusted her glasses, reviewing the Q2 projection reports. Under Camilla, these reports had been works of fiction inflated to hide massive debt. Under Genevieve, they were painfully honest, but the arrow was finally pointing green. Mrs. Calloway? The voice came from the doorway. It was Sarah, the young assistant Genevieve had plucked from the mailroom on her second day. Sarah used to tremble when she entered this office. Now she walked in with a tablet tucked confidently under her arm. Sarah, I told you, call me Genevieve when the door is closed. Genevieve smiled, looking up from the spreadsheets. How are the RSVPs for the flagship reopening overbooked by 300%? Sarah beamed. The Renaissance campaign is viral. People are calling it the anti-luxury movement. We have confirmations from the editors of Vogue, Vanity Fair, and even the critics who tore us apart last year. Oh, and the warehouse in New Jersey says the new supply chain protocol is actually working. Returns are down 40%. Genevieve nodded, a sense of quiet satisfaction settling in her chest. It hadn't been easy. The first month was a war zone. She had fired half the executive board men who thought a woman's place was wearing the clothes, not manufacturing them. She had visited the factories in Italy and Portugal, personally apologizing to the workers for years of delayed payments. She had rebuilt the brand not on exclusivity, but on transparency. "Good," Genevieve said. "And the Coeur de Lion installation? The security team is setting it up now. It looks breathtaking." Sarah paused, her expression shifting from professional to hesitant. She bit her lip, glancing back toward the reception area. "What is it?" Genevieve asked, sensing the shift. "Is there a problem with the catering?" "No, there's a woman here to see you," Sarah said, her voice lowering. "She doesn't have an appointment. Security wanted to escort her out, but she insisted she knew you. She's in a bad way, Genevieve." Genevieve put down her pen. She had a feeling she knew who it was. The ghost of the past had finally come knocking. "Send her in," Genevieve said softly. "Are you sure I can have security?" "It's fine, Sarah. Send her in, and close the door behind her." A minute later, the heavy oak door creaked open. The woman who walked in was a stranger, yet agonizingly familiar. Camilla Rostova had always been a figure of sharp edges, stiletto heels, angular cheekbones, razor-sharp wit. But the woman standing on the plush rug now was soft, eroded by the harsh weather of reality. Camilla wore a grey wool coat that was pilling at the sleeves. Her signature platinum blonde hair, usually coiffed into a helmet of perfection, was pulled back into a messy, dull bun, showing dark roots. Her face was bare, stripped of the armor of foundation and contour, revealing dark, hollow circles under her eyes and lines of stress that had aged her 10 years in 3 months. She didn't stride. She hesitated, clutching a knockoff handbag with white knuckles. "Hello, Genevieve," Camilla said. Her voice, once a weapon used to slice through people's self-esteem, was now raspy and brittle. Genevieve didn't stand up immediately. She let the silence stretch heavy and thick. She remembered the cold water hitting her face. She remembered the laughter. She remembered the feeling of being small. "Camilla," Genevieve said evenly. "You're brave to come here." Camilla flinched. She looked around the office, her old sanctuary, and a flicker of pain crossed her face as she saw the changes, the warmth, the books, the lack of ego. "I didn't have anywhere else to go," Camilla whispered. She took a step forward, then stopped, as if waiting for permission to breathe. "I've been blacklisted, Genevieve. Everywhere. Paris, Milan, London. No one will touch me. The lawsuits took the apartment. The bank took the accounts. I'm sleeping on a friend's couch in Queens and she's kicking me out on Friday." Genevieve watched her. It would have been so easy to relish this. This was the moment the movies promised the villain destroyed the hero triumphant. She could press the intercom button, call security, and have Camilla dragged out, just as Camilla had tried to do to her. It would be poetic justice. "I came to ask you to stop it," Camilla said, her voice trembling. Tears welled in her eyes, hot and desperate. "Please, I know you have the power. Nathaniel, Mr. Calloway, he crushed me. But you won. You have the company. You have the life. Do you really need to starve me too? I just want to work. I'll take a junior buying position. I'll take anything. Just tell them to stop blocking my calls." Genevieve stood up then. The movement made Camilla take a frightened step back. Genevieve walked around the desk, the heels of her boots clicking rhythmically on the hardwood. She stopped 3 feet from Camilla, the exact distance Camilla had stood from her when she threw the water. "You think this is about revenge?" Genevieve asked quietly. "Isn't it?" Camilla sniffled, wiping her nose with the back of her hand. "I humiliated you. Now you're destroying me. That's how the game is played." "That's how you played the game, Camilla," Genevieve corrected her. That's why Éclat was failing. You thought life was a zero-sum game where you had to push someone down to lift yourself up. You confused fear with respect. Genevieve walked over to the window, looking out at the city skyline. I won't call the fashion houses, Camilla. I won't lift the blacklist. Camilla let out a choked sob, her shoulders slumping in total defeat. I see. Well, you can't blame a girl for trying. She turned to the door, her movements heavy with despair. I won't call them, Genevieve continued, turning around, because I don't trust them to teach you anything other than how to be a better snake. But I do have a position open. Camilla froze. She turned back slowly, confusion warring with hope in her eyes. A position here you want me to. What consult? No, Genevieve said firmly. We are opening a new distribution center in Newark. We need a floor manager for the graveyard shift. It involves inventory auditing, quality control of returns, and managing the packing line. Camilla stared at her, her mouth slightly open. You want me to work in a warehouse? In Newark, packing boxes. It pays $28 an hour, plus benefits. Genevieve said, her tone professional and unyielding. You will wear a vest, you will wear steel-toed boots, and you will report to a man named Martinez who has worked for this company for 20 years, and whom you once fired because you didn't like his tie. Camilla looked down at her hands. This is a joke. You're mocking me. I am offering you a lifeline, Genevieve said, stepping closer, her eyes locking onto Camilla's. You built a brand on image, Camilla. It was hollow. If you want a future, you need to understand the substance. You need to touch the fabric, smell the cardboard, and see the people who actually make this company run. If you do the work, the real, unglamorous hard work for 6 months without a single complaint, then we can talk about a creative role. The room went silent. The hum of the air conditioner seemed to roar. Camilla stood there wrestling with the shattered remains of her ego. The old Camilla would have spit on the floor, but the woman standing there was hungry, humbled, and out of options. Camilla took a deep, shuddering breath. She looked at Genevieve, really looked at her for the first time, not as a stray, but as a woman of immense power. Newark, Camilla asked, her voice barely a whisper. Newark, Genevieve confirmed. Shift starts Monday at 10 p.m. Don't be late. Camilla nodded slowly. She wiped her face, straightening her posture just a fraction. Thank you. Don't thank me, Genevieve said, returning to her desk. Thank Martinez. I had to convince him not to quit when I told him who I was hiring. The flagship reopening, the grand finale. 2 weeks later, the night air on Fifth Avenue was electric. The barricades were up, but the crowd pressing against them wasn't the usual aggressive mob of paparazzi. It was a mix of fashion students, artists, and loyal customers, all clamoring to see the rebirth of Éclat. A sleek black town car pulled up to the curb. The flashbulbs erupted like a localized lightning storm. Nathaniel Calloway stepped out first. He looked every inch the titan of industry in a midnight blue tuxedo, but the stern, terrifying look he had worn at the gala was gone. He looked relaxed, happy. He reached a hand into the car, his expression softening into pure adoration. Genevieve stepped out into the lights. She gasped softly at the roar of the crowd. She wasn't wearing a trench coat tonight. She was wearing the centerpiece of her debut collection, a gown of deep liquid emerald silk that draped over her frame like water, structured yet flowing, and around her neck, blazing with a fire that matched her spirit, was the Coeur de Lion. The ruby didn't look like a price tag anymore. It looked like a beating heart. Nathaniel tucked her hand into the crook of his arm, leaning down to whisper in her ear. Breathe, Mrs. Calloway. You own the sidewalk. Genevieve laughed, the sound bright and clear. I'm not nervous about the sidewalk. I'm nervous about the speech. You'll be brilliant, Nathaniel assured her, guiding her toward the entrance. By the way, I got the weekly report from Martinez. Genevieve raised an eyebrow, glancing at him. And he says the new girl on the night shift is a pain in the arse about organization. Nathaniel grinned. She reorganized the entire shoe-racking system in 3 days because she said the chaotic aesthetic was giving her a migraine. Efficiency is up 12%. Genevieve smiled a genuine, warm smile. She always did have an eye for shoes. Maybe there's hope for her yet. They reached the top of the grand staircase. The heavy glass doors were held open by smiling staff members, staff who were now paid a living wage staff, who wore uniforms designed for comfort, not just style. Genevieve paused at the threshold. She looked back at the street, at the flashing lights at the city that had once tried to chew her up and spit her out. She squeezed Nathaniel's arm, feeling the solid, unwavering support of the man who had seen her when she was invisible. Ready? Nathaniel asked. Genevieve touched the ruby at her throat. She thought of the water. She thought of the warehouse. She thought of the future. She was building a future where worth wasn't measured in carats, but in character. Yes, Genevieve said, stepping forward. Let's go open the doors. As they walked into the golden light of the flagship store, the camera shutters clicked one last time, capturing not a Cinderella story, but a portrait of a woman who had walked through the fire and built a castle from the ashes. This story reminds us that the shiny veneer of wealth often hides a rotting foundation, while true value is found in character, resilience, and kindness. Camilla Rostova thought her brand made her superior, but in the end, it was Genevieve's quiet dignity that conquered the empire. Nathaniel didn't just save Genevieve because she was his wife. He empowered her because he knew she possessed the one thing money couldn't buy, a good heart. The twist wasn't just the billions, it was the mercy Genevieve showed to her tormentor. If you enjoyed this roller coaster of karma, justice, and romance, please hit the like button to help us share more stories like this. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a drama-filled episode. And tell us in the comments, would you have given Camilla a job or would you have thrown her out? Let's discuss below.